very warm welcome to the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York and to tonight's Artisan lecture. I am Karen Taylor, Program Director. This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, as well as the generous support of the Friends of the Artisan Lecture Series. We'd also like to thank the New York Landmarks Conservancy and the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art for their support for this evening. I would also like to acknowledge the creation of our windows by the Artistic Director, Thomas Donoghue. So thank you very much, Thomas. The General Society, for those of you who may not have been here before, was founded in 1785 by the skilled craftsmen of New York City. It was founded by 22 artisans. Those artisans at that time consisted of silversmiths, carpenters, saddlers, among many other professions. Today, this 230-year-old organization continues to serve the people of the City of New York through its educational and cultural programs. These include our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, the General Society Library, of course, of which you're in this evening, and our nearly 2-century-old lecture series, of which tonight's lecture is part of. You will find additional information on the General Society on the blue and white postcard on your seat. And for those of you who are interested, you will also find library membership on the registration table. The library was founded in 1820 and is one of 3 private libraries in the city. So tonight, we gather once more to pay tribute to the art of craftsmanship. The Artisan Lecture Series has committed itself to giving voice to internationally known artisans who will talk about the intricacies of their specialized crafts. The mission of the Artisan Lecture Series is to promote the work and art of skilled craftsmen, to insist in ensuring their unique knowledge is understood and carried forth for generations. And it is now my great pleasure to introduce the original creator and curator of the Artisan Lecture Series, who is going to introduce tonight's speaker, Jean Wiart.
Thank you. It's a true privilege for myself to introduce Rhett Butler, and I mean it, right. It was by a chilly day of March that my daughter and myself had the opportunity to visit the large building where the Butler Hardware Company houses the workshops and the artisans who produce all kinds of hardware pieces of the highest craftsmanship. Of course, we knew both about the impeccable reputation of Rhett Butler for his fine hardware production, and we also knew Rhett more personally as a member of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen. But all this put aside, the visit of Rhett's workshop was truly an epiphany. Large and small rooms assigned to such and such tasks as machining, chiseling, patina finishes, storage. But entering the large space devoted to host the library with thousands of catalogs, books, plates, photographs was truly a shock and a revelation. It reminded me of the library solely devoted to the trades of the House of Tools and Craftsmen Philosophy located in the city of Troyes in France. That museum, which is not a museum, it's a house, was for me some sort of sanctuary of the trades. And there in Red Hook, another trades resource sanctuary was existing. The library of Rhett is not only a repository or a mere collection of out-of-print catalogs or precious books. It is for him the priceless resource to learn, the place of inspiration to recreate bygone parts, and more. Then we were admitted in the private cabinet of Rhett. Sorry, Rhett, to disclose all of this, but that is truly a collector's cabinet or a cabinet de curiosité. And finally, the private workshop of Rhett devoted to his own researches, exploration, tests, and tries. All of this convinced myself and my daughter that all in all, Rhett Butler is truly the Benvenuto Cellini of the America's 21st century, or expressed differently, the Renaissance craftsperson of our times. I would conclude this introduction by reminding us about what is a craft person. Someone who works with his or her hands, head, and heart. Rhett Butler, well, embodies a higher degree of craftsperson as he adds up charisma, leadership, and vision. Please join me in a big round of applause to welcome Rhett Butler.
Bravo. So, tonight I'm going to tell you the story of the lonely glass doorknob. And it's my first run. I've been practicing, but I haven't written anything because I think it'll be better if I just tell you the story. Thank you, Victoria, Karen, Jean. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be a member of this General Society. And a lot of my research for this lecture tonight had to do with mechanics libraries, particularly the Mechanics Library in Boston, which is the Massachusetts Charitable Mechanic Association. Later you'll see that it was this facility and others like it that allowed science and art and technology and thinking people to create, much like the way I'm creating now, but they would support them with libraries, with trade shows, with the ability to connect with one another, the ability to share inventions and science and thinking. And I get a lot of that now from the internet, but that obviously didn't exist back in the mid-1800s. So, E.R. Butler and Company was founded by myself in 1990. In the year 2000, after working for 10 years with a company called the W.C. Vaughan Company, I eventually acquired that company because the men running the company were retiring. The W.C. Vaughan Company had acquired 4 other companies in its history, and these companies cumulatively go back to the 1820s. Our company has all of the patterns, all of the tooling, all of the drawings, the catalogs from the 1820s until today. Be just and fear not, my favorite motto of the Mechanics Institute. So, collectively speaking, we're about 190 years of history, of technology, of the making of locks and the supportive instruments that operate those locks. The basic principle of any door or window is that it needs to be hung, it needs to be locked to protect the person inside their home, and that lock needs to be operated. It's basically that simple. The story starts with Enoch Robinson, and he was the mechanic, and the supervisor of the New England Glass Company, Henry Whitney, who was a relative of Eli Whitney, coincidentally. They filed a patent in 1826, and it's patent number 4553. And the reason why it has an X is because it's before 1836, which is when the patent office burned down, and the first 10,000 patents and 7,000 models that was the repository of the inventions and the science of this country was lost in one day. Enoch, together with his brother George Washington, would have a company from 1827 to 1839. In 1839, they separated and had each their own company, but it wasn't as if they were separating for antagonistic reasons. They actually still lived together and then moved later together to Somerville, Massachusetts. Eventually, in 1888, Enoch Robinson passed away. His son, Albert, would take the company over, and Albert passed away in 1904. And in 1904, George and Wood would eventually acquire the company. He brought in L.S. Hall, who had been working for Robinson. Eventually, George Wood couldn't do very much with the business and handed it back to L.S. Hall. And L.S. Hall eventually sold it to the W.C. Vaughn Company and worked for the W.C. Vaughn Company for approximately 13 years. And I still have notes of the draftsman who was taking notes from L.S. Hall, telling him these stories about how he had worked for Enoch Robinson. William Hall, the company being from 1843 to 1920, was originally working with Enoch Robinson. They lived together and had a business together, and eventually they also separated and continued a friendly business relationship. William Hall was more interested in manufacturing locks, and Enoch Robinson was more interested in manufacturing the trim, so they would frequently put their minds together. John Tyne was another manufacturer of doorknobs very similar to William Hall, and his company was also bought by the W.C. Vaughn Company in 1939, and the people working with John at the time moved and worked with the W.C. Vaughn Company. Ostrander and Eshelman was a company here in New York that acted as distributors for the Vaughn Company, and Quincy Spindle, a division of New England Lock, was a company that we acquired in 1999. My father had the company from 76 to 90, and I picked it up in 1990. Because of our acquisitions and my personal insanity, we have more than 50,000 original trade catalogs in our collection, documenting the history of architectural and builders hardware. Our collection, we have several volumes from the 1600s and everything moving forward. We just recently acquired the first book of hardware ever printed. It was French, of course. So it's a very strong library as a private library for history of manufacturing. With that, we have over 100,000 actual original drawings that date back to the 1820s, and we have approximately 250,000 pieces of original hardware, patterns, and tooling. The Robinson family starts with what they call the Robinson Scrolls. George Robinson of Rehoboth originally came from Scotland and settled in the Massachusetts area sometime in the mid-1600s. His grandson, Enoch Robinson, what I would call Enoch Robinson Sr., it's not the Enoch Robinson we're going to be talking about for the bulk of this conversation, married Midwell Shepherd in 61, and they had together 10 children. Of the 10 children, 4 of them would pass before they reached the age of 10, and 3 of them are the ones that we are going to concern ourselves with. Obed, Otis, and George Whitfield. Enoch Robinson, the senior, was originally a blacksmith and eventually became a gunsmith. Obed, Otis, and George would apprentice at their father's shop, and they would manufacture gun locks and cannon from their own molds for the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. The village where they set their shop up was known as Robinsonville. This is Robinsonville here, and this is Attleboro, and that's North Attleboro. Boston is up here, Providence is down here. Here you see Robinsonville, there are the Robinsons there. Richards would play a very important role in the development of the Robinson companies. Enoch Robinson served as a lieutenant under the command of Captain Jabez Ellis, the Minutemen that responded to the Lexington Concord call on April 19, 1775. To get a little background, I think it's important to understand that while we may have declared independence in 1776, the war didn't end until 1783. George Washington didn't become president until 1789. And then we had the War of 1812, which lasted until 1815. So we're still fighting, we're still at war, well past 1776. In fact, on August 24th, the city of Washington was burned to the ground, and that's our capital on that day. Obed and Otis would serve under their father in the Revolution, and obviously George Whitfield was a little too young to join them, but they would fight with their father until the end of the war. All in all, 26 Robinson kin folk would be fighting in the Revolutionary War until the end of the war. Obed and Otis Robinson would create a manufacturing facility in Attleboro, which became primarily the jewelry manufacturing industry of this country, but their concentration would be on the manufacturing of military buttons. They would start by making the gilt buttons that would be on soldiers' uniforms. They would eventually proceed in the manufacturing of glass buttons, which is the earliest known pressing technology of glass. It was a pinching process with a pair of pliers for the most part. And they would make what they called opal buttons, which would have portraitures, and then invented the equipment to actually contain these opal glass pieces and have them act as buttons. Obed's children, Richard and Willard, would eventually take over the company and run it until 1848, at which time it was sold to the Evans and Company, which carried it through to World War II. To compare it again, for time reasons, 1794 was when Eli Whitney patented the cotton gin. So George Whitfield, he's the father of our Enoch Robinson that we're going to be interested in. He filed his first mechanical patent in 1804 for a button-making machine for his brothers Obed and Otis. He went on to patent at least 12 more known mechanical devices, and I say that because it's very difficult to ascertain who invented and who filed what, considering the fact that the patent office had burned down in 1836. But we do know that these exist, and we do know that a lot of them had to do with the mechanical operations of making buttons, for casting buttons, for making nails, and for securing locks. Here he's making glass furnaces, lightning rods, and in the literature from the Franklin Institute concerning lightning rods, he's literally having conversations with Benjamin Franklin concerning lightning. So we're at a time where patriotism is very high, intellect is very sharp, and people are curious, and they are interested in making America a country that they are proud of. Here he's working on railways, locks for doors, and stove parts. George Woodfill Robinson, and this is one of the curious parts of my research that I haven't figured out yet, married Selina Richardson in '91, and together they had a child that they named Enoch Robinson in 1795. That's the end of my information for Selina Richardson and the end of my information for Enoch Robinson. They disappear. I do know that he further married Nancy Blake in '99, and they had 4 children. And their firstborn was also Enoch Robinson. So I'm not really sure what happened to the first round, but they disappeared from every book I've ever found to research. I'm sure it was something fairly horrible. So Enoch Robinson, at the age of 8, goes to work beside his father, George Woodfill Robinson, and his uncles Obed and Otis, producing metal buttons. He would later apprentice with his father in the glass cutting business, and then he would further work with his father and his uncles, developing the equipment and the technology for pressing the glass opal buttons. He would marry Harriet Starkey in 1823, and what must have been incredibly sad, she died less than a year later at the age of 19. Following that death, Enoch receives an order for glass sprangles. I had no idea what a sprangle was, and I still really don't know what a sprangle is, but the best I can ascertain is that it's a small ornamental plate for clothing. And I think it had to do with something that would sparkle for the fashion clothing industry. He managed to press sprangles for the New England Glass Company, and Henry Whitney, who was the superintendent of the glassworks, was so impressed that he offered Enoch employment at New England Glass in Cambridge. I think Enoch, having just suffered the loss of his first wife, was more than happy to leave Attleboro, and he did. 3 years after her death, he married Eleanor McLean, and they had 8 children. 2 of them would not survive, I'm not sure which 2, and 4 of them would eventually join his company: Shepard, Charles, Francis, and Albert. Enoch, issuing his first patent with Henry Whitney on November 4th of 1826, would further patent at least 10 other inventions, mostly to do with locks and doorknobs. The US 4553X, that which is the first glass press for pressing glass doorknobs, would revolutionize the American glass industry. What would be produced by the blowing operation of glass would be increased no less than tenfold in production with a press. Prior to the invention of the glass press, the only product that the United States would export would be raw goods: coal, pig iron, wool. Glass-pressed articles were the first articles exported to England as a finished good. By 1828, which is only less than 2 years after the press has been invented, they are already manufacturing over 30,000 glass knobs annually and selling for $5,000, and this is out of a lawsuit that I will describe later, this information. But they were already distributing glass across the United States within 2 years. Sandwich Glass Works, as well as the New England Glass Works, both which benefited from the technology that Enoch Robinson and Henry Whitney patented, would see their factories grow to hundreds of employees rather than tens of employees. This is to show a little bit about what glass production was before the glass press. There are people blowing, sorry about that, blowing here with a blowpipe, feeding into the furnaces to pick up the glass for the blowpipe, and shaping it on tables, shaping it in molds. It was a very laborious process to make glass products. To understand a little bit better what a glass doorknob is that's blown, I've taken one of ours and cut it in half. So you see the thicker part here goes into the metal socket. This is the head of the glass knob. This is the hollow portion. And in our case, these are the notches for allowing us to set the glass into a metal socket. These are early furniture knobs that were blown. You can see the hollow portion inside each one of these. The difficulty is that this part here has to be drilled and it has to be ground in order to receive the shaft that would attach it to the bureau. What pressing allowed, besides the efficiency, is to form serrations in the bottom so that it would adhere better to the wood drawer, and to allow for the hole to be really clean and done in the same operation as the forming of the knob. I'm just showing you a couple of examples. This would illustrate a blown, cut knob with a typical attachment where the octagonal foot would be locked into the attachment, the threaded rod would come through the top, and this cap would thread into the threaded rod. This is about 1824, 1825 technology. This is a doorknob set where this is the blown one that you just saw, and this is a pressed one. So it's really a hybrid of the technologies at the time. So this particular set would be dated roughly 1826, 1827. This set follows in the sense that both of them are pressed, and you can see the straight line coming through the glass. And they're still using the same technology for attaching the glass to the socket and attaching the sockets to a spindle in order to operate a lock. This is Apsley Palat's drawing of a glass press. His book was published in 1847. And here you can see the person who brings the glass to the operator of the press. He's operating it with a simple lever. This is from Deming Jarvis's book, Reminiscence on Glassmaking. And here you see the person gathering glass from the furnace, bringing it to the mold. The operator is cutting it with a pair of scissors to gather exactly the amount that he needs. And then this is a screw press to bring the piston down to form the glass. This drawing is perhaps a little more accurate in the sense that it shows the ability to move the press out of the way to be able to clear it and pull the items out from the mold. And this is a reconstructed drawing from the magazine Antiques where they're following the description of the patent perfectly. There is the glass furniture knob. There's the piston coming through the glass. This is the mold to hold the formed glass that's split on a hinge so that you can open it up and release the furniture part. It's on a lever operator. This is a spring. It is sometimes also seen with a counterweight. And there you can see the glass coming in to the mold. Outside on the window, I placed one of our molds to excite the public to have some interest in this story. This is, sorry, pressing the wrong button, sorry. This is actually upside down. This is the top, that's the bottom, but I wanted you to see the hollow and what the hollow forms. This is an early mold for a tieback, otherwise known as a curtain pin. They would put the glass into the mold, the piston would come and compress the glass, and there you'll see when the glass is pulled out that there is a hole already for the metal which would be used to attach the glass to the pin, and the pin then going into the wall to hold the curtain back. And here you have a finished curtain tieback. Many designs proliferated after the invention of the glass press. People would take whatever designs they had in metal at the time and make molds to match what they had previously been getting in brass from England. These later ones actually don't have a pinhole because Spencer Richards, who was a member of the Robinson clan in Robinsonville, patented the ability to come halfway through the glass and to place the nut inside the glass knob so that it didn't require passing through. That idea would later inspire patents with Enoch Robinson for the use of doorknobs. This is a early catalog. It's roughly 1810 English catalog, what they call the Birmingham brass trade. And here you can see many different designs that would have been emulated in glass. In particular, I want you to pay attention to this one, because that's going to be coming up. And many of you have probably seen the stars in later glass knobs. This is a plate, one of Enoch Robinson's productions. It's a little bit difficult to explain, and I'm not going to do it tonight, but a cap ring was the next invention for the glass press, and that allowed people to press glass and keep the edge thickness the same. So the middle of the design would actually expand or contract depending on how little or how much glass went into the glass press, but the edge would always be the same thickness. This is a salt stand that is attributed to Enoch Robinson and Spencer Richards. And this is probably one of the most complicated parts ever made in glass of that period for at least another 20 years. It's a bottom or a base to a whale oil lamp, and it required a 4-part hinged mold in order to produce it. It is the only thing known in the glass collecting world that actually has the initials of the glass makers to make these parts. Stamped inside is New England Glass Company, along with ER for Enoch Robinson and SR for Spencer Richards. Since the patent office burned down in 1836, the only way that we really know exactly what the press technology was patented was because somebody decided to copy them. Several workers left New England Glass and moved down to the Philadelphia area. They were intrigued by the offer of lots of cash, apparently. They took the technology for the patented pressing with them and began to make their own versions of Enoch Robinson's product. So Henry Whitney, being the supervisor, and Enoch Robinson filed a lawsuit in in 1829, and in 1831 they finally came out of that victorious, having their patent protected. This is further demonstrated in Science, Art, and Industry in 1853, which was part of the literature was the result of the New York exhibition in 1853, which is one of the world fairs. In here, they write the confirmation that in 1826, Enoch Robinson, then in the employ of the New England Glass Company, took out the letters patented. They were contested, carried on against powerful parties in Pittsburgh. The powerful parties in Pittsburgh are Bakewell. Bakewell was for a very long time considered the original patenter of the glass press. This is one of Bakewell's glass furniture knobs, and as you can see, the one I pointed out earlier in the English catalogs, it has the same exact pattern. What's interesting is there's square holes as opposed to round holes, and they would use square pins to attach the glass parts to the furniture. One project, house, in Milton, Massachusetts for Captain Robert Bennett Forbes illustrates the early glass press technology, given the fact that it was built in 1833 and not very far away from Enoch Robinson and the New England Glass Company. At this time, Enoch Robinson is partnering with Day Newell Day, which is a lock manufacturer in New York City. They're representing Day Newell Day for their locks in the Boston market, and Day Newell Day is representing Enoch Robinson for the trim, particularly the glass knobs, in the New York City market. Here's an early photograph of the Greek Revival house. It does, in this photograph, have an addition added on top for a third floor that was originally portholes. Forbes was a shipping magnate, particularly with the China trade, and his number one money-making product was opium. He did manage to build 80 ships in his lifetime, and this house is built very much like a ship. Here inside the dining room, he imported the entire room from China. It's probably the first known such room in America. If you haven't ever seen this house, it's amazing. At this point, I'd like to thank Haruko for enduring many house museums, many docents, endless glass knob photography, glass knob cleaning, and she's hiding right there on the porch. Here we see a very early, and this would have to be roughly 1832, so the house was probably under construction before it says 1833. One of the glass knobs with a perfect perforation according to the Enoch Robinson patent. It also has Day Newell Day written on the lock. In 1836, we see Robinson teaming up with Draper and Lord to produce two patents to resolve having to make the pin go all the way through the glass part. So in this particular case, they have an octagonal foot engaging the octagonal base, similar to what we already saw, but they have a ring that slips above the foot, a compression ring that fits between the two, and then this ring would thread down over the compression fitting, locking the glass to the metal base. Took a while to find one of these, but now we have two. There's the octagonal base of the glass part fitting into the octagonal base of the metal part, lead that was put in to fit the glass properly, lead that would be put over the glass to protect the glass from the brass, the compression ring itself, and then the slip ring that's threaded that would thread onto the outside of this piece. Their second patent was a very similar idea, but instead of all the threading, they would just place the octagonal glass part into the octagonal metal part, and on a lathe, they would bend the metal around the glass part. Here's a couple examples of that. And these are curtain pins. The real revelation comes in 1837, and here we have Enoch Robinson teaming up with his brother George Washington Robinson to file a patent, number 434, which is a method of attaching glass knobs to metallic sockets. This patent would revolutionize the making of the glass knobs themselves, as opposed to just the pressing of the glass knobs. The patent office lost the drawing, but we have the original patent model. So here you see it from the side, and there you see it from the front. And if you can read it, it says E. and G. W. Robinson of Boston, July 3rd, 1837. For this particular application, the Longfellow House, which is also known as George Washington Headquarters in Cambridge, is an excellent example of the work. It was originally built in 1759, but Longfellow completely redid the interior of the house in 1840. If you haven't been to this house, it's another great house museum. This house was copied endlessly across the United States. In researching for this lecture, I found this image of Longfellow longingly looking at what I believe is his inspiration. Black glass was the ticket of the day. Not something very easy to formulate, and not something very easy to make in 1840. Longfellow was using a technology and a material that was no more than 3 years old when he decided to redo the interior of his house. Here you see a couple of black glass doorknobs of Enoch Robinson's manufacture that would be exactly of the same period. Here you can see the lead coming into the socket. Dating these is actually not so hard in the early stages because you would have two holes where they would pour the lead in one side and the air escape would be on the other, and then one hole after they figured it out, and then no holes on the sides of the knobs because they would figure out to do it from underneath. Glass knobs were so popular in the Boston area in 1849 that they had their own subdirectory in the Boston Directory. Hard to believe. So this brings me to mechanic associations, of one of which we're sitting in. The Massachusetts Charitable Mechanic Association was founded in 1795, so I guess that's just after this one. 85, right? So it's 10 years later. But we can claim that Paul Revere co-founded ours. It was officially incorporated in 1806. The first triennial exhibition was in 1837. I haven't had the time to figure out exactly how many of these triennial exhibitions Enoch Robinson or George Washington Robinson or Richard or Willard or William Hall or John Tyne were involved with, but it is at least half of the ones listed here, and they had 20 in the course of their triennial exhibitions. Hammett Billings, an architect in Boston, quite famous, also an artist, did the original watercolor for what would later become a steel engraving for the diploma that was handed out as a premium or an award at the Mechanics Institute. These mechanic institutes and the triennial events would be where manufacturers would showcase their inventions. They would highlight the technologies, the science behind their work, and they were festivals in a way. Here you can see a display case for locks, knobs, hinges, and door plates that would be at one of the triennials. For the third triennial in 1841, the award committee gave the highest premiums to G.W. Robinson and Company and to Enoch Robinson and his business partner and roommate at the time, William Hall. They each won a gold medal for their locks and their doorknobs. Enoch would eventually win several different medals, including this silver medal, which we recently acquired. And what's notable about the medals is that Gobrecht was the person who created the dies. Gobrecht was the head of the U.S. Mint engraving department at the time. Enoch Robinson in 1839 would become a lifetime member of the Mechanics Institute. Mechanic Institute triennials and several types of fairs like that, including the Mechanics Institute in New York, were the precursors to what would eventually become the World Expositions. 1846, the United States held its first national fair, otherwise known as the Great Exhibition. There is absolutely nothing that I can find that documents this, minus this little circular that I found. So I haven't found an image to entertain you with tonight. The Great Exhibition in London is considered the world's first fair. It was in 1851. Enoch Robinson would also exhibit in New York in 1853, the Exposition Universelle in Paris in 1967, and the Centennial in Philadelphia in 1876. The London Crystal Palace, I could go on to a much longer story about locks and bank lock technology, but I'm not going to do that tonight. The primary contact for that was Day Newell Day and their agent, A.C. Hobbs. And if anybody knows anything about that industry, Steve, A.C. Hobbs is a pretty famous guy who picked locks all around this country in order to sell Day Newell Day locks. He was the agent representing Day Newell Day and Enoch Robinson at the Crystal Palace in 1851. Here's the American section, and you can see centered is Hiram Power's Greek Slave, which made quite the stir. And here is a Gleason's pictorial of 1853 showing the Day and Newell display case with the bank locks and A.C. Hobbs prominently putting his name just underneath the bank lock section as opposed to his employer. And then you see Robinson hardware trim on top of that. The New York Crystal Palace of 1853 was basically our attempt to replicate the 1851 exhibition in London. Again, we have Day Newell Day, George Washington Robinson, and Enoch Robinson displaying at the fair. Here's the interior, and to your left you can see once again Hiram Power's Greek Slave. The Universelle in Paris in 1867, Enoch Robinson and Son were invited to exhibit in an area outside of the main hall in the American section of the park. The American section was in this area right here. Later, obviously, that becomes the Eiffel Tower. Here again is the American section. And here you can see Avenue des Etats Unis, and that's the area for the Americans. And then Boulangerie is specifically where Enoch Robinson would show with Henry Bacon from Boston. N67, Enoch would have shown something even more spectacular than what we are talking about tonight, which would be hand-cut, cased, colored, mercury blown, and silver mounted fixtures and fittings. And he went on to create some very special pieces of glass and metal technology, but we're not going to talk about that tonight either. Documenting early glass cabinet knobs is even harder than finding actual pieces. The parts were not very well represented. I've only found 2 places so far, both out of a McKee and Brother in Pittsburgh. But here you see 2 rose knobs. One is a 1-inch and one is a 2-inch advertised. And here again, another one in the center, a rose knob. So it is extremely difficult to ascertain who manufactured what glass cabinet knob. And between the New Bedford Museum of Glass and the Corning Museum of Glass, there is absolutely nothing available to document this product. We do have some letterheads. We do have some limited advertising of the period. Enoch here advertising the cut glass doorknobs. There's very little early information. But what I do like here is there's a full explanation of the variety of hardware he goes on to produce. And it's everything from the knobs to the locks to the hinges, houses, ships, hotels, and insane asylums. And I'm going to assume that insane asylums meant small New York City apartments. This is William Hall's catalog of 1906, documenting glass knobs. Again in 1916. Here's John Tyne in 1928. All of these companies, as you know, were acquired by W.C. Vaughan. This is a catalog page out of the W.C. Vaughan catalog. And here's one of our drawings after we picked up W.C. Vaughan. We've gone to replicate most of the shapes that were offered in the Robinson, Hall, Tyne, Vaughan catalogs. We've managed to produce a greater range of sizes, and we've managed to produce a greater range of colors. We offer all the different designs in 12 different colors and in 3 shapes. I'm going to let you see a few of them, because I'm almost finished. This one coming up has the octagonal foot with a double lock. So we are currently working on a book to document the history of our company from the 1820s, thank you, Jerry, all the way till today. About 300 pages into that project. This is a very small part of that project. It's been a pleasure to work on this, but it's a killer time-wise. It's 10 hours a day on average. We are also working on a film to document the production of a glass doorknob, and that's currently underway. But the people doing the film were in Germany 2 weeks ago, and I asked them for a small piece of that film so I could show it to you tonight, showing you how glass actually gets pressed. That's it. Oh, questions? Good luck. There were probably hundreds. Yeah, it's very much like it is in Europe. It's a cottage industry in the sense that many different people make many different parts of the process to make them, and then they would all share who could sell what. As long as we're talking early glass knobs. Once you pass the 1850s, the production started to skyrocket in the sense that hundreds of thousands of them were being made annually by multiple manufacturers.
Well, when was the set screw introduced on your hold on?
I don't know if I have an exact date for that, but even in the ones that you were looking at from the 1840s, instead of a set screw, they would just drill a hole straight through the shank and through the spindle, and they would put a pin. So when exactly that might have changed to a screw, I would have to guess that it would be sometime in the 1860s, 1870s. Impossible.
Oh, really? Well, when you go to a lot of architectural artifact shops, they usually have these big bins of glass knobs. Are they different than what's there? They're the same type where one is on a pin and the other you screw on.
Knowing how rare it is to find those knobs, I would have to guess that they're later. The ones that you're looking at.
Oh, well,
The bins of doorknobs with the shanks on them.
that's right.
But if they're threaded with, well, usually the later ones have spindles that are threaded at both ends, and they thread the knobs onto the spindle.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then they would have that screw you were talking about.
Yeah, if it's a set screw, it's definitely later.
Okay, how much later would that be?
At least the 1860s, 70s, and probably much later than that. Because the set screw technology hasn't changed
Okay,
for
so
100
would
years.
that have been in the late 1800s and then stopped there?
No, if it's threaded on a spindle, it would still be being made today.
Oh, really? With the glass knob?
Yes.
With brass?
Rhett, how do most of your clients find you? What's that process?
I don't advertise very much, so it's mostly word of mouth.
Is it with the working with the designer?
Test.
On new construction or a restoration? I know you do all of it, but I'm just.
So what's the question again?
How do most? So in terms of a restoration or new construction, obviously has to be a very detailed person in terms of the architectural hardware and making a very special, construction or project. So what I'm saying is don't be so modest. Tell us about a project.
I mean, we've worked on a lot of different projects, restoration projects to large condo conversion buildings. It's all possible. I just feel my part is to make something very well made and beautiful and correct and perfect and let everybody else figure that out. I don't concern myself so much with what it costs to make something as long as it's done correctly. And that usually means more expensive than ordering something from China and having it stamped out on a forging press. That said, we do also work with forging presses, just not in China, to make larger quantities for larger projects.
So do you mark your pieces at all that go out? Is there any distinguishing mark that you can see in the lock or on a door handle?
Unfortunately, no, we do not. Usually, it's needed the second we're getting it done.
Do you also work with historic homes where it's just a one-off project? You're retrofitting into a room that has 8 glass doorknobs and one of them broke off?
We do a lot of work like that.
Okay.
When you acquired those other companies, did they have a good catalog of what they had and what they created?
No, unfortunately, I've had to backtrack and research most of the information outside of the acquisition. Sometime during the 70s, Vaughan was purchased by Ned Johnson, who eventually started Fidelity Investments, and it got kind of trashed and shipped to a company in Long Island. And it was only because one of the former owners needed a couple of doorknobs for a specific project that he was working on that he went to Long Island and tried to buy the doorknobs, and the guy said, well, why don't you just buy the company back? So, lots of things get lost over the course of a couple hundred years.
I did have a question. Looking at that film, it looks like making the doorknobs, the glass doorknobs now, is still a relatively hands-on. It's not terribly mechanized. Is that correct? Or is that just still for the higher-end versions?
It would have to be described as the higher-end version because to utilize current manufacturing of glass for something like a doorknob, I would have to book out a factory for, say, one single day and take a delivery of 500,000 doorknobs. That's how fast the machines run today. Unfortunately, with great speed comes a loss of quality. So better that we operate with these smaller facilities, utilizing the highest quality glass that we can get, and have it done manually.
Could you give us an idea of how many employees you have, what manufacturing you do yourself, where your locations are, just a general idea of where all your materials come from and what process you've gone through to seek them out? Well, without disclosing any trade secrets, but I'm
okay. That
interested
sounds
in
like
your
another whole lecture, but we are 60 people. We have a showroom and an office and a design room here in Manhattan. We have a showroom in Boston. We have a manufacturing facility in Brooklyn. We have another manufacturing facility in Braintree, which is south of Boston. We have a small pattern and tooling department in New Hampshire. We manufacture glass parts in Italy, Germany, and France. We are distributors and agents for people in Belgium and France and Italy. We are designing hardware for Italian companies for product that's made in Europe for the European market. We produce approximately 80% of what we sell internally. We are utilizing mostly brass, some bronze, a lot of stainless steel for the parts that require the strength for stainless steel. And I think that's most of your questions. Yeah.
It seems did you take over the business from your father then in the 70s? I think that you mentioned that your business belonged to your father before you.
There was a business that my father had. My father didn't make hardware.
I see.
So he had already retired when I picked up the company, and I decided that I wanted to actually design and make hardware.
That's what I was curious about. How did that desire arise?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a mixed story, actually. I graduated from architecture school. I'm supposed to put in a plug for my school, by the way, Rice University. It's awesome. And I guess I came out thinking I just wanted to specify. And in the process of trying to specify, the 80s and the 90s weren't very friendly for the idea of making things of quality. It was the period where everybody just thought they were going to ship it off to China and make it for half as much, or Mexico, or Brazil, or Argentina. And the quality level of just about every single thing that I was working with was going down. And that's when you decide you're either going to do it right and make it yourself or change your career. Yep. All right, well, thank you very much for coming.
We have a presentation.
Rhett, can I just ask you, just before you move away, we just first of all want to express our great thanks to Rhett Butler for this evening's wonderful, such extensive research, a fabulous overview of hardware. And we're really thrilled that you could be here, Rhett. And I think just to finish what you were saying, you and the other artisans who are participating in this lecture series, you embody that thirst for quality, and we are so grateful that things moved away from the way that they were in the 1980s. So really, I want to thank you so much for this really amazing presentation, and thank you for all the hard work and research and study that you put in it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. And on behalf of the General Society, our Executive Director, Victoria Dengel, would like to make a presentation to you.
And Rhett, I add to Karen's comments, that was wonderful. As an organization that was founded in 1785 by 22 craftsmen, it is, we are so honored to count you as a member. I mean, you are a true craftsman, and you're doing such really, it's a public service and a national service by publishing your work, and to think 10 hours a day on top of all that you do, we thank you. So, on behalf of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York, founded 1785, we express our gratitude to Rhett Butler, owner and founder, E.R. Butler and Company, of fine architectural hardware, the manufacturing of glass doorknobs for doors and furniture, for your participation in the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen Artisan Lecture Series. Thank you, Rhett.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And perhaps Meg would like to present this, our program assistant. Lifetime membership to the General Society Library. So Rhett was asking about our collection, so now he'll have plenty of time on top of those 10 hours and a full day's work to come in and investigate what we have. I want to thank Rhett so much again for being here tonight. I just want to also mention, because this April, it's an extraordinary month for Artisan Lectures here, because we have a feast of riches. And I just want to mention that on next Monday, April 18th, we have Robert Baines, who is an extraordinary goldsmith from Australia, considered to be one of the best goldsmiths in the world. And I also want to mention that we have a very special event on Tuesday, April 26, when we have Christopher Spitzmiller, who is the owner and founder of Christopher Spitzmiller. He will be here to be talking about the lamps that he has designed and to talk about his profession. And I also want to say we're also very honored that Christopher could be here this evening. So I want to invite you now to stay for a glass of wine and some cheese and crackers, and to thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you at future lectures. Thank you. Thank you.